Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in here to the Nutritional Revolution podcast. We have an amazing guest for you guys today. We're going to dive into and hopefully get some nuggets of wisdom from Dr. Michelle Cleere today. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Michelle. We'd love to know, but kind of as we get started, just dive right in. What do you do? Tell us what you do.
Yeah, that's a common question I get on a daily basis. I am a global performance coach, and in a very brief introduction, basically, I help people develop their head skills. So
Amazing.
some people call them coping skills, life skills, mental skills. There's a lot of different terminology for it, but I really help people align their head and their body so that they can do whatever it is that they do more effectively.
Awesome. And what drove you to get into this field?
Oh, geez, where do I start with that? I'm a transplant from upstate New York, and I actually, about 37 years ago now, came from New York.
Wow.
And I had a master's degree already in recreation and leisure. And I got here and I was like, yeah, I don't really want to do that. So that sent me on a journey to figure out what I wanted to do. And the journey led me, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, back to getting another master's degree in sports psychology. And I was like, sports and psychology. Wow, that is cool.
Yeah.
I didn't even know it existed.
Right.
So I loved the program. And then I went on to get my PhD in clinical psychology, and here we are.
Amazing. Yeah. And you have your own private practice?
I do.
Awesome. Yeah. And with the sports psychology degree, or would you say the majority of your clients are athletes, or maybe you're not allowed to tell us that?
No, there's a lot of ebb and flow, I would say, in my practice. I would say usually most of my clients are athletes, but I work with tons of business people, a lot of other performers. I've worked with actors, actresses. I worked with an aerialist from the circus, chess player from India.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, the list really goes on and on. So it's pretty fascinating because this work really does translate to pretty much every walk of life.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Oh, heart surgeon.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's pretty incredible. So kind of with that, the variety of different fields of sports or professions or things like that you're working with it, and obviously you're working, like you said, with the mindset and connecting with the body piece. Is there a common kind of like theme across that? Like, is it like, is there a holdup? What do you see kind of being the most common mental performance kind of like block that people have?
Well, one of the most common, and I know because I've experienced this in my life as well, is that, you prepare physically hard and then you get to the competition or the day, right? And all of a sudden, like, your head does something like completely opposite, right? And you're like, wait a minute. I mean, I just put all this time and energy into training, and what is happening right now? Right. This really unexpected, kind of almost unexplained thing happens that's out of our control. So I would say that, the nerves and the anxiety are number one. And then kind of number two is really, confidence is really kind of a huge thing.
Yeah. Nerves and anxiety. I had a client recently where he is kind of exactly what you described. He's put in all this really hard work. He's gotten really close to the day. We're a few days out from the race. He's trying to qualify for world champs. And the mind is just going, he literally is not sleeping like at all. So, before. And so in the situation like that, is there a nugget of wisdom you would throw at that person who's got the racing mind at night and not able to fall asleep?
Yeah, well, I always talk to clients about sleep hygiene, right? Because I think that's incredibly important. Making sure you turn off all like screens and everything like an hour before you're going to go to bed. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of a process, because one of the things that I found with many, many clients is that nerves and anxiety really starts like maybe a week before, right, the event's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen. So imagine like 7 days out, right? You're nervous, you got butterflies, you got these thoughts going on in your head, like, oh my God, I'm not ready for this. I don't think I can do this. Yikes, what's going to happen? And then that just multiplies over like 7 days, right? So
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, you try to go to sleep the night before and your brain's like, no, I don't think so. Like,
Yeah.
I still got stuff to like
Yeah.
talk about and deal with, right? So I help clients deal with like all of that, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
7 days out. Okay,
Mm.
what do we need to do that 7 days out?
Yeah.
What needs to happen like the day before, that night? How do we help you get sleep? And of course,
Mm.
that's not something we're going to practice like just before a big event necessarily,
Right.
right? But talking about that, and then of course the morning of and leading
Mm-hmm.
into competition. So all of those moments are incredibly important
Mm-hmm.
to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah. So by having them walk through and kind of process like a plan for that week, the night of, the night before, the morning of, you'd say that's a kind of a helpful tool or tactic for them to have on
Yeah.
board when they're stressing like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I worked with a track guy who was a Olympic hopeful, and we were having this conversation. Especially, I mean, we talked about the week before, but the day before, and
Mm-hmm.
initially I thought, really? I'm like, yeah, really. And
Yeah.
so we talked through like what he usually did, right?
Mm.
Which was, kind of went along with the plan, with other people's plan, like things just sort of happened and unfolded, right? But those weren't the things that he needed to have happen to
Oh
sort of
yeah.
prepare him to go out and race the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So always very interesting conversations, right? And
Yeah.
and yeah, sometimes people are like, really? Yeah, really. But then when you do it, right?
Yeah.
And then, several races later, he's like, wow, that was so incredibly helpful. Right. Not
Awesome.
only for the day before, but for sleep and the morning of, like, yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah. And so with something like that, I mean, they're like questioning you, like, really? Like, is it because it's something so simple and maybe easy that they didn't even think of it? Okay.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I get to the end of working with a client and we laugh because,
Yeah.
I talk about how it's not rocket science, right?
Yeah.
It's just these really simple things, but these
Hmm.
really simple things, you must know, right? Like working with people around nutrition, like even getting them to drink water, it's like,
Yeah.
like the hardest thing,
The
right?
basics. Yeah.
Yeah. So but it's not rocket science,
Totally.
right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's the same way with my work as well. It's not
Yeah.
rocket science, but it's really how does that cognitive behavioral change need to happen and need
Mm-hmm.
to happen for each individual person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Amazing. And so out of curiosity, do you see more or maybe are more of your clients women versus men, or do you tend to see more like mental holdups with men versus women? I'm curious.
Well, again, I think there's a lot of ebb and flow. I think sometimes there's more women and sometimes there's
Mm.
more men. Like right
Mm-hmm.
now, I would say the majority of my practice is men. I'm working with a
Mm.
lot of like business people,
Mm.
C-suite,
Yeah.
entrepreneurs
Yeah.
around their business. So
Mm.
it really, I wouldn't say that, over my 20 years of doing this work, that there's been more, you know, more of one over the other. I think it's just
Mm-hmm.
like sometimes there's more and sometimes there's less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. With the sports that you work with, are there any differences between sports? Like, do you see more, um, again, kind of like mental holdups with like team sports versus individual
Yeah.
sports versus physique? Like, what's that like?
Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely more athletes who are playing individual sports
Mm.
for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah. Because it's pretty apparent, right? The
Yeah.
stress and the pressure and everything that comes along with that. Definitely work with a lot of team sport athletes, but more individual sport for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I know we have like gymnasts, physique, sports based versus wrestlers can be very physique based too, but do you
Yeah.
see a difference there at all with any of the kind of the mental performance piece?
Not really, not a ton.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really, so here's the thing, right? Like, these skills are developed like unconsciously, largely when we're kids, right?
Right.
Like a situation happens and we just have to figure out how to deal with it, right?
Mm-hmm,
When we're
mm-hmm.
young. And so those are the things that sort of follow us. Yeah. I mean, there's other things that happen, right? Like in school and with parents and with coaches that sort of also, a lot of times, unfortunately, feed into those unconscious development of like coping skills.
Mm-hmm.
So, then there just becomes this time where many people have to develop conscious coping skills, and that's men and women and physique sports and team
Mm-hmm.
sports and individual sports. Yeah, I mean, I think there just becomes this like moment of like, okay, something's not quite working, something's not going right.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, maybe it's that. Let me like figure out who I need to talk to about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
When they're in that nervous or kind of more anxious state, is there an elevation in like the fight or flight hormones? Like is cortisol going up? Do you?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So we wanna, I'm a big firm believer. I just call them routines, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having a routine, a way to kind of organize those moments before performance so you don't get to that place of fight or
Mm-hmm.
flight where the cortisol
Mm-hmm.
is going up. Because obviously, like once you're in that, it's much harder to bring yourself back from, I call it
Mm.
back from the brink,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's like you're on the edge and you're like, okay, yeah, it's really hard to bring someone back from that. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of theories around this, but like inverted U catastrophe theory, just basically catastrophe theory is one of my favorite theories because it talks about, right, like you're sort of getting yourself psyched up and then you get to this like place where you're in your zone. And then if you keep having nerves and anxiety, you
Oh.
just drop off. And it's absolutely true. I've seen it time and time again.
Mm-hmm.
And even like really seasoned professional Olympic athletes can't really bring themselves back from that place.
Shoot. And that's
Yeah.
within that moment, like in a race, for example, they
Yeah.
can't bring themselves back. Interesting. And do you think that's because the cortisol is just kind of like tapped them out or?
Yeah, I think it's the cortisol. I also think it's just like, the cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
The loop goes on and on and on and on. And it's just hard to at some point figure out like what's reality and what's not reality
Yeah.
anymore, right? So
Yeah.
my role really is largely to talk about what that is for people right now and then help them to develop something that's more effective,
Mm-hmm.
and gonna actually prepare them to do battle versus like
Yeah.
inhibiting them from being able to move forward.
Yeah. What are some of the things you would describe as what are some things that people should be mindful of that can be these um, performance blocks that like they should be aware of it and realize, hey, maybe I should come meet with Dr. Michelle. Like, what are those things they should be mindful of that might pop up?
Well, I mean, beforehand, I talk about it in two ways. So there's the somatic, right? The butterflies, the heart rate going up,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes sweaty palms.
Mm.
I've had a lot of athletes who throw up.
Oh yeah.
Um, so there's the somatic piece, and then there's the cognitive piece, right?
Mm.
Like I don't know if I can, I don't know if I'm ready.
Mm.
The what ifs, the should haves, the
Mm-hmm.
coulds, like all of that stuff. So
Yeah.
those are all, I check in with all of my clients about, both of those elements because
Mm-hmm.
there's usually a little bit of both present for people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for some people, there's not. So
Mm.
that's why it can be important to just like reflect on, what is. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that can be a really important aspect, um, for clients to do is like,
Yeah.
I'll have them check in, before we really actively like help them develop something out. I'll
Mm-hmm.
have them check in. So, just check in with your body, check in with your
Mm.
mind. Some clients aren't as aware as other clients. Most
Mm-hmm.
clients are pretty aware of like what is going on,
Yeah.
especially if they're feeling anxious and nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. So with the mental piece, the what ifs, is that something where are you eventually trying to get somebody to not have any what ifs in the lead up and change that to the, I think you said the what is kind of thoughts, comments, like what is that expectation there if someone has the what ifs going into a race, for example?
Well, we don't know if the what ifs are ever going to happen.
Yeah, that's true.
So we spend a lot of time and energy on the what if. So that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
where I start the conversation, right? Like, how
Mm.
much time and energy are you wasting on this? Because you don't know
Yeah,
if this is going to happen,
right.
right? And then the next part of the conversation is like, sometimes we talk about worst case scenario and how often has
Mm.
that happened?
Right.
Like, okay, zero,
Yeah.
right? Um, I know that you had someone on that was talking about mindfulness. I do a lot of
Mm.
mindfulness work with my clients, really
Mm-hmm.
helping them to just like get better at being more present, because
Yeah.
I think that that is really incredibly important,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you're present, that's when you can act and respond to things,
Mm.
um, versus not being present, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're, a mountain biker and you're in a race, right? And you're in your head.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I call that multitasking. And when you're
Mm.
multitasking, right, like not, neither thing gets your full attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as a matter of fact, as we just talked about, if you're in your head having that like what if, should have, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, la, 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 right? The chances of bringing yourself back are just,
Yeah.
minimal at
Yeah.
best. Yeah.
It makes me think of it actually makes me think of Alex Honnold. I think there was one documentary I was watching and they were talking about, I thought they were talking about something literally, I don't know if he had a concussion or something, but they thought that like neurally there was something different in his brain because he like was not scared. He, would attempt these things and it sounded like he didn't have any what ifs. Like he was just, you would just in the moment and do it and go. It sounds like that's kind of what we're trying maybe to get to some extent. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely trying to help athletes. I'm sure you've heard this term plenty, like be in the process versus like the outcome. I always talk
Mm-hmm.
about how, you know, in the alphabet, you can't go from A to Z, right? You have to go A, B, right? And so, this is life as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, if you've done your work and you're prepared and you stay in the process, then the
Mm-hmm.
outcome is likely to be what you want it to be, or at least close to that.
Yeah. Amazing. I
Yeah.
love that. So out of curiosity, any differences in performance mindset that you see in athletes versus like the executive based clients?
No, it's pretty similar. It's
Yeah.
pretty similar. I mean, I would say, some of my business clients, for example, might not experience nerves per se,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of like confidence issues, focus
Mm.
issues,
Oh yeah.
organization issues, like outcome driven versus
Mm-hmm.
like, again, like being present, sort of moving through things.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some things with business people that I work on that I don't work on necessarily with athletes, like,
Mm-hmm.
communication and managing leadership, all that kind of stuff. So there are some differences there, but
Mm-hmm.
there's also, quite a few similarities.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely think like with many of our athletes, like a lot of them are like I would call them type A personalities. Like they have these big lists and these big to-dos and like want to check them
Yeah.
all off. And there can be some difficulty, I think, when you have a type A athlete that's also like a high performing executive. And where do you draw the line between working on work and supporting your or training for your race? I've seen some athletes struggle in that arena as well. It's like finding out how to just prioritize too their goals, I think, at the end of the day, and where how to fit it all in, I guess, is the best way to say it.
Yeah.
um yeah, do you see that people struggling to kind of fit things into their schedule, get it all done with all the demands of life? Or
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's it's a challenge for most people. So much life to live, right?
yes.
Especially when you're a competitive athlete and a high performing, business person.
Yeah.
I think those two things, especially like you so aptly put, type A personality, right, is sort of like, geared towards that, or, what's the word I want? It's, that's like, that for them is like, whoa,
Yeah.
like, yeah. And so, I think it is, that is definitely a challenge. And I've had so many conversations around like the type A and the perfectionism. I mean, perfectionism is, especially with kids right now, is so
Oh yeah.
rampant in our society. It's
Yeah.
it's just frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that, do you think, related to social media access and stuff like that, or?
Yeah, I think social media has a big part in that, right? Because really a lot of what we see is like the pretty, positive, perfect things on social media, and you don't see a lot of the flip side. I
Yeah.
think that's shifting a little bit now,
Yeah.
but there's still a lot of the pretty positive, perfect
Yeah.
people on social
Totally.
media.
Yeah.
So there's that. But I think that, for kids in particular, I think that unfortunately school systems feed that like
Mm.
unintentionally. And
Mm-hmm.
then, sometimes coaches feed that and
Mm.
parents feed that. I think, I don't think anyone necessarily feeds it intentionally, but
Yeah.
I mean, our society is, kids have a hard time getting into college now. And
Mm.
so, I
Mm-hmm.
got to be perfect at my sport to get a scholarship, and I
Right.
got to be perfect with my grades to get into
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
And, to a certain degree, I understand that. But since there is no such thing as perfect, then we have to have a conversation around like, okay, how then do you move through the world? Because this is
Yeah.
going to only set you up for failure, not success.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. I, yeah, the social media thing, I think about it, and I'm grateful it wasn't around when I was in middle school and high school, and all of that
Right.
stuff is,
I
it's
know.
got to be brutal. I can't
Yeah.
even imagine.
Yeah.
So kind of on that, a little similar topic with that, do you, um, work with clients on specific like goal setting and how, how they can, I guess, be, maybe in an athlete perspective, be a better athlete with utilizing things like goal setting, or maintaining maybe a bit more consistency in certain areas of their life?
Yeah, goal setting is an incredibly important conversation to have. When it comes to confidence,
Mm.
goals is a huge part of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So usually clients come to me, and again, they have the outcome goal, but they don't have any goals to like sort of like, what I call the roadmap that's going to help them
Oh, yeah.
get there,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of times people are still in this mindset of setting like stretch goals, and it's like,
Mm.
no, we are
Mm.
not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
We want to make these realistic so you
Yeah.
can meet it, so you can make it happen, so you
Yeah.
can feel successful and good about it.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, goal setting is a huge player in confidence. So it's a definite conversation for most all of my clients.
Yeah. I definitely have had goal setting conversations, I think, with our clients from a nutrition perspective too, making, coming up with things that are just seem so easy that they like, they, like you were saying, they kind of like laugh at it, and they do like the really like, but yeah, you're saying, once they kind of start checking those boxes off, they're like, okay, I can do this. What are some example, or can you share any examples of like setting kind of, I don't know what you call them, but I call them like micro goals, or like the stepping stone goals, that seem so easy? Like, do you have any examples you could share?
Uh, Let me think about that. Well, this isn't an example per se, but
Okay.
I was working with a top ranked junior tennis player. She
Mm.
lives in Virginia.
Mm.
And we were having this conversation around goals.
Mm-hmm.
And, I talk about long-term goals. And when I talk about long-term goals, I'm not talking about a year. I'm not talking about a friggin' strategic plan. I'm talking about like 4 to 6 months,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because again, like at least you can see it,
Yeah.
right? Versus like even a year. I mean, let's think of COVID. How many things changed in a year,
Yeah.
right? So if you're working on something that's a year out versus like 4 or 6 months, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's a huge difference.
Totally.
So So I talk about that. And then I talk about like having these short-term goals that are very realistic and very specific. So I
Mm-hmm.
was working with my junior tennis player in Virginia, and I said, okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about your tennis. Because one of the things that comes up for clients is like they'll come up with short-term, like, specific goals, but they're
Mm-hmm.
things like, I want to be more aggressive, or I want to have a better backhand or a better forehand. And I'm like, no, 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 that's not small enough.
Oh
Right.
yeah.
Because then I go and I have the conversation. So how many things go into your forehand?
Mm.
Well, about 10. Right. So I don't know. So
Yeah.
which of those things do you need to work on? Right.
Mm.
So anyway, I sent her away and she came up with a whole sheet
Oh my goodness.
and she texted to me. And I was here in my office laughing hysterically because I've never had anyone go to that detail,
Oh
but it
wow.
was so great
Mm-hmm.
because she just took like every like kind of medium goal or
Mm-hmm.
medium skill that she had to work on, and she broke it all down.
Wow.
And so now, right, like now every day she goes to practice, I say, okay, you just pick one thing off there. And
Mm-hmm.
that is your focus for practice, that one thing.
Yeah.
Not like if you're working on a forehand, not all 10 things that go into the
Mm-hmm.
forehand, you are working on this one micro skill,
Yeah.
right? And then I go on and I explain why, right? So for me, one of the limitations with coaches is they'll say, okay, we're going to work on your forehand, right? Well, so again, like if I'm going to work on my forehand and there's 10 things that go into my forehand, I'm going to focus on this. And then the next minute, I'm going to focus on that. And then the minute after that, something different. And then I might
Mm.
come back, right? So your brain is going all over the place trying to figure out like, I'm not really sure what to be focused on necessarily, but let me try this. And
Mm.
so this is where sometimes people aren't successful,
Mm.
right? Like, well, I practiced it. Well,
Mm.
yeah, but your brain was here and there and back there and over here, right? Versus like having one thing to focus on.
Yeah.
And then you get better at that one thing and then you move on to the next thing.
Yeah. Wow.
Right. Yeah. So
I like that. I love that. That's something where I always, yeah, I always think like with the degree and the training that you have, right, is great for your field. And then there's all these jobs and professions where they work with people too, but it would be such a good skill to have had some schooling in this piece of it, right? Because it
yeah.
is so important and it is a
Yeah.
big piece of the puzzle. So kind of back to like we obviously work with a lot of endurance athletes. One of the things we see very commonly happen with endurance athletes, and I'll say even probably more so in our runners, but definitely as well in our triathletes, is GI issues, whether it's pre-race, during the race, post-race. And I'm curious, I mean, there's things we do from a nutrition perspective, of course,
Sure.
to try and mitigate this, but I'm curious if you've ever had clients like that where you've improved maybe the mental side of things, managed a little bit of those stressors. How does that impact or minimize maybe their likelihood of GI issues? Do you ever see anything like that?
Yeah, well, and personal experience. I was a
Yeah.
triathlete for 15 years and I did
Yeah.
marathons for about the same number of years, right?
Yes.
So, and I know, many times having GI
Yeah.
issues. Yes, so I can relate. And I have had a lot of other clients who have had similar issues. And again, I think I mentioned at the beginning, I've had clients who like threw up before they were
Yeah.
going to go, right? And so then they're afraid to eat, which it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, well, you can't
Yeah.
not eat, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so it really is again, like figuring out that whole plan again, like 7 days
Mm-hmm.
out, day before, night before, morning of, and really trying to keep the system calm
Mm-hmm.
and help them to come from more of a, neutral, positive, like thinking place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and helping them to figure out like what are the things that are going to help keep you like calm and
Mm-hmm.
relaxed and focused on something other than what you think is going to happen or what you think you're not going to be able to do or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I have found from a mental perspective all of that stuff has been incredibly helpful.
Awesome. Yeah. That's always
Yeah.
good to hear. Cause I mean, from the nutrition side, like I said, there's only so many things we can change, right? And you do have to eat something to keep the engine running. So if we can get the gut kind of continuing to function, I think that is a big piece of it for sure. That a lot of our athletes probably could use some nuggets from you on for sure. Yes. So let's see. I know too, you do, do you call mental toolkits? Is that how you prescribe
Yeah,
mental toolkits?
sure.
Is that
Yeah,
kind of what you've been mentioning as we've kind of chatted along here, the
yeah,
goal setting and that kind of stuff? Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
I think I like that terminology, mental toolkit. I think that's gives them a little like package to carry around. I visualize. I think that's perfect. And then you've also done, I think you've written some books. Tell us kind of where people can find you, what other resources you offer to your clients.
Yeah. Well, over the years, I've written many books. I have a book called From Here to There. And it's for, it was primarily written for women who are in sports and business. It talks about like my journey through life. That's the first part of the book. And then the second part of the book is kind of using my journey, things I've done with clients, research,
Cool.
to help like move people like through their journey with this
Mm,
mental toolkit sort of
yeah.
piece of it. Yeah. I also, they're not really available right now, but I have a system. It's called Beating the Demons.
Oh, cool.
So that's something that I've, on and off over the years have put a lot of work into.
Amazing.
Um, and then I have a new mini course that just came out. It's called Beating the Fear.
Okay.
So if anyone wants to check that out, it's called, the website is beatingthefear.com. And it's been a year in evolution with my marketing team.
Wow.
And the thing about this mini course that I love is it's like jam packed with things that I do with my one-on-one clients.
Mm,
I know sometimes people are a little like, the one-on-one thing, not really
hmm
sure what's this
hmm
going to be, what it's going to look like.
mm,
So this mini course, again, is just jam-packed with like really great toolkit kinds of things and
awesome.
really actionable things that people can, just pick up and do
Yeah.
right now. And the thing is, like, a lot of the stuff that you and I have been talking about and a lot of the stuff that I deal with clients is
hmm
really fear, right?
mm,
And then building the confidence to
yeah.
not be in that place of fear all the time.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
How long do you think sometimes things like that like take changing that mental focus or shifting from the like fear to the confidence piece?
Well, much of my work is short term, honestly.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So for kids, usually up until like 17 or 18, usually
Mhm.
12 sessions, maybe a few extra more.
Yeah.
For young adults, it's like around 18, and for adults, it's around 24. Just because,
Wow.
the older we get, right, the more
Yeah.
kind of enmeshed we are in our like stuff.
Yeah.
So separating from that can be, really hard.
Yes.
But yeah, it's definitely not a long-term process. And again, as we talked about at the beginning, it's not rocket science. It's really
Yeah.
simple things. And I feel like over the last 20 years, I've done a really good job of like figuring out how to like move people through the maze in a way that
Awesome.
like makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's still tailored to every individual person.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Amazing. And you mentioned you work one-on-one, and then do you do like webinars, corporate stuff?
Yep.
I connected with Dr. Michelle through Voice in Sport because she's one of the Voice in Sport Viz experts there. But yeah, so you offer like corporate seminars and stuff like that as well.
Yep. Corporate
Amazing.
seminars, workshops, group presentations.
Amazing.
I've worked with teams, organizations. Um, yeah, I do writing for a lot of different like publications and magazines as well.
Awesome.
So a lot of different things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And then look, before we tune off here, one other thing that comes to mind that I wanted to ask you is breath work. Do you use that at all in your practice?
Oh yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to
totally.
tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I use it in a variety of different ways.
Hmm.
Obviously, usually to help someone get, in a more calm and relaxed space.
Mm-hmm.
But, people can use it before, people can
Hmm.
use it sometimes during. I think it
Mm.
depends on like the performer or the
Mm.
sport.
Hmm.
Obviously, a swimmer using breathing during swimming,
Right.
or yeah, or marathon runner, yeah. So there's some areas where breathing doesn't always make sense, but
Yeah.
yeah, breathing is not only does it help just to circulate the O2 and the CO2 and sort of calm everything down, right, the
Hmm.
whole system, but you're also focused on it,
Yeah.
and it's funny in some situations, like when I work with tennis players
Hmm.
sometimes. I know I'm bringing up tennis again, but
It's all good.
when I work with tennis players sometimes, because we want to try to move them from being internal to external,
Mm.
the breath, right,
Hmm.
is such a great tool because between
Mm.
points, because they can focus on that, which then takes their focus away from the internal.
I see. Yeah. Super
Yeah,
interesting. Uh,
I mean, it's a great tool.
yeah.
And there's so many different ways to breathe, right? Like 2 and 2 or three,
Yeah.
4 and 5, or 4, 7 and 8, right? I talk to clients about, breathing in through the nose and drawing the air from the abdomen and like
Mm.
exhaling through their mouth. And then we talk about, different varietals of like ways to breathe. And then I just
Hmm.
let them choose what's going to work for them.
Yeah. Cool. So the sounds like for sure inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth, and then for however long, there's different options to kind of go that route.
Yeah.
I think the breathwork stuff, yeah, is pretty incredible. And yeah, like you're saying, swimmers, maybe not an option, but definitely probably for a lot of our triathletes and
Yeah.
runners listening, it can be a great tool to utilize to calm that. And you mentioned too, like shifting from the internal to external. So they're starting out kind of maybe stressing a little bit in their head or anxious and what's going on in their mind. And so you're trying to shift that focus to something outside and take the focus off the internal stuff that's going on. I had heard someone, I think a client told me that when they were running, they had worked with someone, they were telling them, I forget the exact, like I think there was an acronym, but they were having them like it's like I think they called it like 5, 5, and 5 or something. While they were running, they wanted them to like name like 5 things that they're seeing as they're
Yeah.
running, name 5 things they hear,
Yeah.
and something like that. And I imagine it's probably trying to do that, what you're saying, move that internal to external focus. So
Totally. Yeah.
yeah.
And the 5, 5, and 5, I know about that as well. And that
Okay.
works for some clients. Counting sometimes works for clients as
Mm,
well.
hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. With someone in a racing situation, if they feel like again, I'll use my client that just did Oceanside last weekend, where he was like, he got to the run, his legs were just dying with when you get in that situation, and he ran out of his nutrition, he lost it. Is it I've heard things like focusing on whatever the next aid station and just like kind of like have that in your sights. Like, do you have tools in that situation where someone's like in a race and then the mind's maybe starting to get to them, even though they've hopefully practiced all their mindset stuff leading up to it, but now they're in the race? Is there any suggestions there for the client?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of unexpected things that
Right.
happen in races, right?
Yeah.
So getting good at dealing with those things, I think, are important. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, like sometimes, clients they will take some deep breaths. They will
Mm-hmm.
walk through the aid stations. Um, I like the whole rubber banding thing where you sort of see a rubber band around yourself and the person in front of you, and it's just
Oh,
bringing you closer
cool.
and closer. Or,
Yeah.
you know, I'm going to see if I can catch that next person,
Yeah.
or, let me just go the next mile. And
Mm-hmm.
if at the next mile I'm not feeling great, like I'll stop. Right.
Yeah.
But, like again, just trying to be present and move
Mm-hmm.
through like each moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The mini goals or micro goals. I love that. I think that is definitely applicable to our listeners for sure. And definitely as we get into this race season. So I think this is I think this is awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Michelle, for hopping in here with us and giving us your time and sharing some of these nuggets of wisdom. And then, as a reminder, we will put in the show notes for everybody where you guys can find Dr. Michelle. You can check out her site, work with her, any of that stuff. And yeah, we'll have Michelle share those notes and we'll put them down there for you guys. So thank you again, Michelle, for hanging in with us today.
Super. Thanks for having me on. I absolutely appreciate it. It was tons of fun. So many great questions.
Yeah, good. Amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.